ever since I've been taken to places and getting chased by cows and all sorts ever since. We'll do a little presentation on the history of the ranger, sort of the role of the ranger as we see our job. Terry's the technical one of the two, the just tend to flag it. We'll whiz through it, just a brief resume of the sort of work we do. We're lucky, we're based just down the road in Brindleford. Every area ranger in the national park thinks their area is best, so they're biased towards it, but we've got a great area here. And we'll just have a look at some of the things we get involved with now when technology sorts itself out.
Normally this is a presentation, I've recently done it, we did it for a group of ramblers. Usually lasts about 40-45 minutes, so I'm just going to skip through some of the things that I don't think are really relevant to this project. So just to talk a little bit about the National Park. First of all, we're going to talk about the 1995 Environment Act. And I think it's fair to say that up until that time, the government of the day thought national parks weren't really doing a very good job. So they came up with a couple of objectives. The first one was to do with conservation, and you'd think, yeah, that's an obvious thing that the rangers will be involved in, conservation. The next one, people are perhaps not so aware of, and that we have to create a means of passing on the understanding of the national park, what the national park is about. And that's really why Tom, Mike and myself are here today, to pass on that understanding if we can. In fulfilling those two objectives, we also have the duty to the local communities. And what that means is we really have to look after the people that live and work in the national park and the surrounding areas. So all our work is really based on that particular ethos, and if you can see from that, we're sort of in the middle. We're in the middle of the national park. We liaise between the residents and the visitors, particularly the landowners, the big landowners, and the farmers who work the land. But you can see from there, it's the Petership National Park, believe it or not, is the second most visited national park in the world, and it's only Mount Fuji in Japan that has more visitors. And the reason for that, you can see there are large areas of population, Manchester and Sheffield in the north, Derby, Nottingham, Stoke-on-Trent and the Birmingham area down in the bottom. And nobody's ever, this figure that keeps coming up is they reckon there's 20 million visitors a year coming to the national park. And I was reading an email before I came out today along the lines of somebody said that there are more visitors on an August weekend day. There are more visitors in the national park than there is actually people who live in it. So it just shows you how heavily used it is and how important it is. That's just the areas that we're split up into, so I won't go any further into that. The work that we do, restore habitats, yeah, again, that's something that we do quite a lot of. This is one of the female rangers, Lynn Burrow. Believe it or not, this is what we call a dew pond. In the southern area of the national park, it's mainly limestone. Limestone is porous, and so it's difficult to store water. So a chap called John Dew decided that it would be a good idea to hit these depressions where there was a natural water supply to line them with clay so that cattle and livestock could feed in them. They're also a very good habitat for
Rangers,
yeah.
Great crested news.
Great crested news, yes, thank you, Tom. And Lynn is just clearing out that. And believe it or not, the best way to clear out that pond she found was to do the saw, was actually to saw away at the vegetation. Very, very effective. Yeah, again we do. Sorry. Great access. We try to put, where we can get landowners permission, we try and put gates in as easy access and so take out stiles.
Especially stone squeezer styles with a dog in the bottom.
I don't know if you've heard of the Pennine Way, but the Pennine Way is a long-distance footpath that runs from Edale in the National Park all the way up to Kirkby-Alton in Scotland, a distance of about 270 miles. It first came into use in the mid-60s, but certainly by the 1980s, because it was so popular, we're having big problems with erosion. And having tried many different ways to try to restore it, we decided to use flagstones. These are flagstones, interestingly enough, from redundant mills, the majority of them coming from the Manchester area. And if you ever walk along the path, you will see where little holes in it, perhaps small metal fittings, where machinery had been actually fixed to these flagstones. Very controversial at the time when they went down. We were accused of sort of urbanising the countryside, but I think if you look at particularly if you go to an area at the top of what we call the Snake Pass, you'll see an area there that's about, 50, 75 metres wide. You can actually see a depression in the ground, but what you can also see is where all the vegetation, etc., has come back, and with it the bird life and wildlife, etc. Tom, before he came an area ranger, for instance, is not on this particular photograph, but one of his roles for about 10 years was moving these flags into position. Quite a back-breaking job. You usually put sort of 4 on a sort of pallet, helicoptered into the side of the path, and then leave it into position. Quite difficult, heavy manual work. And what you've got to remember is that you've got to get to that site. And this particular one is called, in the middle of Bleaklow, called John Trackwell. You drive with a Land Rover for about 20 minutes, and then you've got a 40-minute walk to get to the site. So, it's quite an arduous, long day. And we have a Pennine Way Ranger, and that is Martin Sharp, keen mountain biker, and something that we're just really getting into now, introducing mountain bikers into the national park. Chamu mentioned about the Carver Weir project, £1.4 million, I think it was, to rebuild the weir that was in danger of collapsing. The weir was put in to service the power supply at Carver Mill. Also, in doing so, it created an area of wet woodland, which is very rare and a very precious habitat. And so, with the help of Heritage Lottery Fund, that project is nearing its completion now. And Nick Quaife, the project manager, finishes, I think, in September. Along with that, there's also been a sum of money or part of that sum of money was to improve access into there and to give people again an understanding of what the area means. That funny creature is called a brook lamprey. I won't go into a lot of detail about it, but basically, it's quite rare, and one of its habitats is just up there at Carver Weir, and it makes its sort of nest, if you like, in the gravel on the riverbed. Protecting the landscape, unfortunately, like many areas, we have problems with people writing things we don't want them to write, so we get over that. We've got a very high pressure water hose, if you like, that we use for fighting fires, which on this occasion worked pretty well on that. Litter, again, like everywhere else, one of our roles is to collect litter. Unfortunately, particularly where you've got car parks, you get litter. Recreation, important, teach people the safe use of the countryside, make sure you're wearing the proper attire, etc. Charlie mentioned about Carpenter going around the peak in his sandals and things like that. I wouldn't recommend it, but having said that, on a day like this, you don't really want to be wearing boots, do you? Be sensible, I think, is the answer. Sometimes we come across lost people. It's surprising, actually, when you go out particularly on Kinder, I think nearly every time I've been up there, somebody's asked me, even if I'm not in a uniform, has asked me, can you tell me where I am, or can you tell me how to get there? It's quite a featureless plateau, and so you've got to be able to read a map, and I think we're going to do a bit of talk about map reading, I think, later on. Guided walks, very popular. We have something like over 200 guided walks in the programme. The majority of them are done by volunteer rangers at the weekends. Various subjects, everything from archaeology and history to wildflowers, you name it. I'm sure that we cover it in some way. And we even do navigation, for instance. We do work with special needs people, or people who ordinarily wouldn't be able to access the countryside, special needs, and perhaps people from inner cities, again, who haven't experienced the countryside and perhaps lack the confidence to go out there on their own. And that was a day that we had on the Monsell Trail. There's a viaduct there whereby we could do an abseil off there, and these were made absolutely fantastic people. You've got to actually drop over a rail, and then you clicked onto a harness, and then you abseil down, I don't know, about 75 feet or something like that to the bottom. That's what a ranger does best. When I saw this photograph, that's our colleague in the north, Fiona, I thought, oh, this is going to inspire confidence. You like the map that she's got there, you know, which is on this guided walk. Chamu mentioned the Kindermass trespass, which occurred in 1932 and really led to the formation of national parks. In the Peak District was the first national park in 1951. We work in partnership. You may have read in the press fairly recently that the Eastern Moors now, still owned by the National Park, but is managed by the National Trust and the RSPB. And the Roaches, which is in the southwestern area of the park, now managed by Staffordshire Wildlife Trust. They've got something like a 99-year lease, I believe, on that. Really because the resources of the National Park now are very limited. But again, we do work in close association with both organisations. Special projects, Winwood, just around the corner there. Again, Tom has been instrumental in creating this project. It's one of the areas that woodlands that the National Park own. Although it's a national park, we actually only own about 4%. The rest of it is privately owned, but this wood is one that we do own. And we found that sheep were getting in there, it was being overgraced, the understory wasn't coming through, and so we fenced it, we've taken out a lot of the non-native species, and I think that certainly seen it this year, it's made a fantastic improvement to birds like pipe, flycatcher, woodcock, etc. Are now finding their way in there. We're both based at Brunt's Barn, and in the, again, Tom has done the work on this. There's a wildlife area there of about 2 acres, which we've opened up, we've put in paths, ponds, all done by volunteer rangers for school groups to visit, and this year we had 110 pupils come from Hathersage School, for instance, to use that facility. It's in its infancy, but gradually it's getting more and more popular. So some of the things that we're hoping to, that we've done to restore it, and some of the animals and birds that you'll see in there. Again, we worked on the mosaic project, and I remember that we had a really good day with Chamu when we went for a cycle ride around Lady Bower. She brought 2 friends with her, both who got big rucksacks, which I thought a bit strange really. We stopped sort of halfway through, took the rucksacks off, and then produced this amazing spread of food. You know, it's absolute. That's one of the joys of being a ranger. It was really, really brilliant, really brilliant. More and more we're involved in education, particularly with the primary school groups, and we go into schools now, as I mentioned, the Alice School, for instance. Volunteer rangers, there are something like 250 volunteer rangers. Generally speaking, come out roughly once a fortnight, and they're based at the 13 areas within the National Park boundary. There were three chaps earning a well-earned rest because they'd just built this wall, which had been knocked down by a tractor or something. But they do all the things we do, path work, putting in signs and gates, and some of the access that we showed earlier on. Fires. This time of the year, you know, this is probably the driest spell that we've had for a number of years, and this was a grouse chick that had been caught up in the flames. We haven't really had a serious fire, I think, probably since for about 4 or 5 years. The last one I think that I can remember was on Kinder, I think. We have to get water on the site. Well, obviously, it's difficult to get water to some of these upland areas. So in the majority of the cases, we use helicopters, and they've got like a big sort of bowser underneath, tank underneath. It drops down into usually into a reservoir, collects it, and then just dumps it onto the fire. Helicopters are very expensive, so we can only do that with the permission of the landowner. We're looking at probably somewhere in the region of about £800 an hour to run a helicopter, and they usually have a sort of call-out fee of about £3,000. So it's a decision that's not taken lightly. And we use these things called centaurs, which have got this pressure washer I was talking about. It's sort of on the back there, and it forces a jet of water into the peat, because the peat, the danger with the fire, if it goes across the top, it's not a problem, not really a problem. It's when it gets into the peat it becomes a problem. And so we have this pressure washer thing that forces a jet of water about a foot into the ground, and hopefully stops it and stops the peat burning and exposing the bedrock. That just shows that was a satellite photograph of the fire, the big fire that we had on Bleaklow in 2003. We're all trained in first aid, and we used to have defibrillators, but there seems to be a problem with them at the moment. We advise on public rights of way. We're not the highways authority in the national park, but we do advise, and this is one of the routes actually that goes up from up to Stanage Edge, which is down in close to vehicles. Always very controversial. Country Tribe and Rights of Way Act, again about a third of the national park now, about a third of the national park now, something like 200 square miles, you can walk wherever you want. On other occasions you've got to stick to either footpaths or bridleways. Just to show you how important that Heather Moorland is really, something like 75% of Heather Moorland is actually in the UK. There are sort of areas, particularly down the western side of Europe, where it has it, but we've got 75% of it. And it's got the highest protection that land can be given. Not only is it in a national park, it's also a site of special scientific interest, and it's got 2 European designations, a special area of conservation and a special protection area for birds. That's just a photograph. When a lot of work has gone into restoring the moors, they suffered very badly over the last few hundred years with overgrazing and pollution. And this is just a shot of a helicopter. They usually take up about, I think we've seen those sort of builders' bags. They have bales of heather in them. They usually connect about 6 of them together and lift them into place, and then they're dropped on the moors. At the moment it'll be spread by hand, but they are trying to mechanise this. Again, a ranger hard at work. And in the end, hopefully what will happen is that was a shot of the leaf blow fire when all the vegetation has been burnt off. And hopefully we can turn it into something like that. Okay. Any questions?